So you may have remembered that I talked about a new supplement called Get Dopa. Now, I have now been taking Get Dopa for about 3 months now, every single day. And I have to say, I'm very excited that I'm bringing them back as a sponsor for the podcast because it works. Get Dopa has combined lots of the different supplements I was taking and just put them into one. So it's only 3 supplement tablets a day. And these combined are 16 powerful nootropic ingredients in the one smart supplement. It's really clever. And it's been created by a neurodivergent person. His name is Matt Buff. I've chatted to him and he's so passionate in helping neurodivergent brains thrive, feel regulated, less anxious, more clarity. And I have to say, I have really been surprised by the impact that Get Dopa has had on my working day, feeling much more calm. My memory, my energy, my cognition, my focus, my mood has been significantly improved. I've just felt like a better version of me taking Get Dopa. So I really wanted to be able to share this with you. Now, many of you have messaged me to say that you have bought it using the code, which is Kate10, and you have also noticed a difference. Now, you can take Get Dopa alongside medication or instead of medication if medication is not for you. And it has been celebrated by many different lifestyle medicine practitioners. Also, Dr. Rachel Gow, who is a nutritional neuroscientist who I've worked with, who is on the podcast, is also part of my ADHD Women's Wellbeing hormone series. And also Sarah Osborne, who is also an ADHD nutritionist. And they're all saying the same thing, that the fantastic, unique formulation, which is incorporating a blend of ingredients renowned for their cognitive, energy boosting and mood enhancing properties, is a fantastic supplement for ADHD. So I want you to have a look on the show notes or go to the link. It's getdopa.com. And if you use my discount Kate10, you'll get a 10% discount. Head to getdopa.com, put in my discount code, and that should give you an opportunity to buy it at a slightly lower rate. I hope it really helps you. And please do message and let me know. We'd love to hear. Okay, now back to today's episode. Welcome to the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Kate Moore-Youssef, and I'm a wellbeing and lifestyle coach, EFT practitioner, mum to 4 kids, and passionate about helping more women to understand and accept their amazing ADHD brains. After speaking to many women just like me and probably you, I know there is a need for more health and lifestyle support for women newly diagnosed with ADHD. In these conversations, you'll learn from insightful guests, hear new findings, and discover powerful perspectives and lifestyle tools to enable you to live your most fulfilled, calm, and purposeful life wherever you are on your ADHD journey. Here's today's episode. Hi everyone, welcome back to the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Podcast. And this is actually also going to be in the ADHD Women's Hormone series as well. I'm so excited to bring in a really interesting guest and someone who I believe should be able to speak to so many different women. And her name is Victoria White. She comes under the name Neurodivergent Birth on Instagram. Victoria is a birth and postnatal doula who supports families through pregnancy, birth and beyond. And she believes birthing people have the right to a positive birth and postnatal experience. And this can be achieved through the consistent help of compassionate support. Now, you're based in Aberdeen, in Scotland, and you've also been trained as a traumatic birth recovery 3-step rewind practitioner. Sounds interesting. I want to ask more questions about that. A perinatal emotional health and wellbeing practitioner. And she also is the mum of 2 girls, one of them who has been diagnosed autistic and ADHD. And you are passionate about improving the support of neurodivergent people perinatally. So, you know, I'm delighted. I can't believe that we've not really had this kind of conversation before on my platform. So I'm just really happy to have you here, Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Kate. It's amazing to be here.
So yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. And weirdly, I was only talking to my daughter who's 15 about 2 days ago about what a doula is, and never talk about it.
Okay.
And because she wanted to know what the difference between a midwife and a doula was. So perhaps maybe we can just start with that, just to give a little bit of context, and then we can move into sort of the more of the neurodivergent side.
It's a good place to start. So yeah, a doula is somebody who provides continuous, practical and emotional support for birthing people and their families. So this can be antenatally as we're preparing for birth, can be at births themselves, and then postnatally as well. There's a great role that a doula can play in supporting new families. Doulas are also really passionate about making sure that they signpost their clients to good quality evidence-based information. So the role is definitely not a replacement for a birth partner or a midwife. There's absolutely no clinical care offered by a doula, and we have to be really clear about that. But I think what we can do is plug some of those gaps that unfortunately we just can't access these days in our maternity services around continuity. We really get that opportunity to develop a long-standing relationship with our clients, really get to know them and develop trust and understanding. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what a doula, the role of the doula is.
Yeah. I mean, you can understand why a doula would be an amazing addition for someone who is neurodivergent going through the perinatal process.
Yes.
What I would love to know is, why do you believe that we need to maybe support neurodivergent people going through this process? What are you noticing that perhaps the challenges, more of the struggles than, say, neurotypical?
Yeah. At the time when my own daughter was being diagnosed, and I was really getting into this to my stride with my birth work, I myself became super hyper focused on the two. I've always been hyper focused on this topic of birth, but on the topic of neurodivergence as well. And it really, it was really clear to me that there are so many elements of the whole perinatal journey, for want of a better word, that can be differently experienced by neurodivergent people. And in many ways, the challenges can be that many of us experience can be more magnified for neurodivergent people. And there are some positives too. And I think it's important to always look at those as well and not just talk about kind of negatives all the time. But for example, the themes that we often cover, and I run a workshop for birth workers with another doula looking exactly at this question. And the themes that we cover are around sensory processing, communication, executive functioning, and mental health, particularly anxiety. So the sensory processing side of things is fascinating. And when we think about people who might have some sensory processing differences, they may be sensory seeking at times or avoidant of sensory stimuli. And we think about the whole journey, right from conceiving through to having a newborn baby and all the sensory elements of that, how we feel in our bodies, right? When we're pregnant, we get this, some of us will really perhaps struggle with feelings of nausea, and many people really do struggle with hyperemesis. Our body starts to change, so just the way we move in our body is different. Our interoception changes, so how we experience thirst and hunger and tiredness, and then also the physical feelings of having a baby moving inside of us. And I think it's really important to normalize that is not a joyful feeling for everybody, or elements of it might feel good and you might appreciate the kind of connection with the baby, but at other times, some people can really feel quite uncomfortable about that sensory experience, and then with that might come some shame and feelings of guilt about not being in love with that experience, like we're sort of told by society that we're supposed to feel. Birth itself is obviously a hugely sensory experience. And when we look at the postnatal period, it's huge. Everything that this little person in your life is kind of outputting is very sensory. We've got, the noise, we've got the need to be physically kind of in contact with us all the time, particularly in those early days and weeks. The vomiting and the weeing and the pooing, and it just can kind of all culminate in this quite overwhelming period for people. So I think it's important to have awareness around how some people experience that time, and also for us to share with pregnant neurodivergent people what some of the things, some of the challenges and some of the positives might be, because if it is your first time as a pregnant person, you're not necessarily going to know where the points where you might need more support are going to come up until you're in it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I mean, it sounds so valuable, but also so validating because, so many of us are only getting our diagnoses much later on, way after childbirth, mostly perhaps because of a child being diagnosed. So we're sort of almost out of that place. But what you're describing now is almost a way to heal retrospectively of that awareness and that acknowledgement of what we went through and the self-punishment and all the things, like you say, of like, I should be feeling this, but I'm not, or I should be connecting better, or the sensory side. What I would have loved to have had back then, I had my first child actually when I was 25, which was relatively young, and I had absolutely no idea about neurodivergence, ADHD, like nothing. But when you talk about all those things, then I really that's just like flagging up all sorts of things that was going on. And there was just so much kind of, you're a woman, like you should know this, you're a mother, like why are you're not kind of understanding this? Like, why is the sensory part so hard? Why is it when he cries, it's like it's piercing through your skull? And now I wish that I could give myself that compassion looking back. So are you finding that the people that are coming to you who are going through this process from the very beginning, it's almost like the awareness is so key of that recognition of this is what could potentially happen, or this is what you may find challenging. And when it happens, it's not like, oh my God, what is this thing? It's almost like prevention and the bigger picture when we know how many women, I know specifically neurodivergent women really do struggle on a higher percentage of postnatal depression, postnatal psychosis, like it's very, very real, this. Unfortunately, we've got statistics of, postnatal suicide as well. So what you're doing from the very beginning of building these foundations, this understanding, this awareness, this self-compassion, can have such a big impact moving forward as a parent. Are you sort of, I guess, when you're doing this work from the very beginning, can you sort of see like, wow, this is really powerful stuff moving forwards?
Yeah. I get kind of like, it's cliche, but I get really goosebumpy about it because earlier this year, I launched a podcast. It's called the Neurodivergent Birth Podcast. And it's so interesting, Kate, because I think, probably 90% of the people that I've spoken to on that podcast about their perinatal experiences as neurodivergent people are looking back with a lens of neurodivergence that they didn't have at the time when they were having their babies. So it is hugely validating to be able to look back and sort of think, with compassion, yes, that was a difficult experience. And these are some of the reasons why. And it wasn't because I was useless getting it wrong or whatever, some of our critical inner critic might have been saying to us. And I'm also getting messages from people who are pregnant right now who do know that they're neurodivergent, because I think we're in this real kind of time of change and momentum and awareness. And they're hugely validated because they found a place where people are saying, yeah, this is how it was for me, and it validates what they're going through as well. I think as well, a lot of neurodivergent people identify as being very kind of motivated to learn everything they can about topics like pregnancy and birth when they're pregnant, and to really perhaps get caught up in the shoulds, right? And learning about, perhaps with some rigid thinking about how things are going to be. And there's an element of control. And I absolutely identify with this myself. I really wanted to be in control of absolutely everything. That was how my life had been led up to that point. And I wasn't going to do anything differently in pregnancy and childbirth. But then the reality was, when there were times where things felt very out of control, or things didn't mirror what I was reading in the books or on the internet. And that brought a great deal of, I was very distraught with the fact that I wasn't experiencing things as I perceived I should be experiencing them. So it can really lead to a lot of anxiety and mental health issues at that time. And then obviously your listeners will know all about hormones from the amazing work that you do talking about the relationship between hormones and ADHD. But we've got all the hormone shifts going on as well. So that can really, really impact how we're feeling as well. And particularly with ADHD, that post-childbirth kind of crash in estrogen and it is a huge crash, can really exacerbate symptoms. And I was reading, I think it was a 2021 study that found that, unfortunately, on average, different studies quote different things, but between 14 and 20% of people who have babies may experience postnatal depression to some degree. For people with ADHD, that goes up to 57.6%. So it really is an issue, and it's something that we definitely need to be talking about and kind of preparing people for that time when we have that big hormonal crash, and how to manage some of that and how to seek support if needed.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that statistic is actually startling, and we do need to know about that. And the more we talk about it and normalize it, then it's okay, what can we put in place? What support can we put in place? Because we don't want to be left in a situation where that does happen and we've not prepared for it. Just the practicalities of, can we get someone to come in every day and watch the baby while we're asleep? Can someone bring food in? Can we hire a cleaner for this time? Can we have some option of being able to give the mum that opportunity to rest, sleep, to have some downtime, to go for a walk? Because these are the little things that can impact, how we feel postnatally. And when people talk about the baby blues, especially when the milk comes in, and like you say, it's that sort of few days, 3 days from what I remember, it's like the 3 days after and your milk comes in, it's just like, oh my goodness, you've not slept. I remember it so distinctly, having the whole family think they were doing a favour of leaving me for 2 days for me to come home with the baby. And then on day 3, they all descended at the same time. And it was like back to back to back. Every single day, a friend would pop in and they'd all stay. They'd all stay for a cup of tea and to feed help me feed the baby and do that. And actually, I remember at the end of those 2 weeks, when everyone had got bored of coming over and I was left, I was just a mess. I had no boundaries. I said yes to everybody. Whenever people wanted to come over, I was like, yes. I was not thinking, well, that's when I could sleep, or that's when I need to just like have a cup of tea and have my lunch. It was everyone else's needs were before mine. And this is way before, there was, now I understand that, there's people pleasing there. There's not understanding my own energy, not understanding when I needed that decompression, that downtime, how important sleep was. I mean, for me, looking back, sleep in ADHD is like vital. And if I don't get sleep, it has a massive knock-on effect to everything. So I have to protect my sleep. And, sometimes I don't, and I really notice that. But when you've got a baby, you're not in control. You can have a baby that sleeps amazingly all night, or you have a baby that wakes up every 2 hours and it feels like torture. And that's every single day for months and months. That's going to have a massive impact, on someone with ADHD. Just a quick reminder that I have built a library resource on the website, which is ADHDwomenswellbeing.co.uk. And I am creating a hub for you to be able to look for all different types of resources, online workshops. I've got the hormone series, which has now been broken down into individual workshops, which range from thriving with ADHD post-diagnosis, how to avoid burnout. I've got something called the ADHD Holistic Starter Kit, which is 3 workshops in one. I've got things about managing your ADHD nervous system and a 3-hour tapping into your ADHD Gold workshop. I am trying so hard to curate a list of different workshops. So when you are not getting the help and the support you want from maybe resources locally, that you're able to go onto the website and really find what resonates with you right here, right now. It's all there. And I've tried to make this as accessible, as cost effective as possible for you, because this is all about awareness, empowering, helping you advocate for yourself and get the information that you all deserve. So it's all there on my website, ADHDwomenswellbeing.co.uk. Now back to the episode. I mean, when you're working with your clients, what's the sort of the level of time that you start working with them until the end? Like what kind of support do you give them?
Yeah. I think, the beauty of the doula role is it's so flexible, and that's one of the reasons I love it so much. Every client will have different needs and we'll be able to meet them in different ways. But some people will, before they're even pregnant, get in contact because they know that doula support is going to be potentially important for them. Most people will seek out doula support perhaps in the middle of pregnancy if they know that they would like to have a doula present at the birth. It gives time to, spend some time together antenatally, cover some, doulas aren't, different doulas do different things, but they're not necessarily kind of, antenatal teachers, but we will obviously talk through the topics around labor and birth that are important to their client and kind of delve into them in a deeper level than perhaps might be offered in an antenatal group. But obviously it's about becoming companions as well. You want the person who, answers the phone and then knocks on the door to be with you during your labor, to be a friend and a trusted companion. So it's about developing that relationship as well. So typically I'll spend 3 or more sessions with a client before attending their birth. And then postnatally, it can really be whatever it needs to be. I think a lot of people feel that postnatal support is only in the early days or weeks, but I've supported people 6 months plus into their life as a new family. It really depends on the individual situation. And a postnatal doula will typically, turn up with some nourishing food that's been made and will do whatever needs doing. And that might be taking the baby so that you can have a sleep or have a shower or whatever you need to do. Perhaps you need to run and get some errands done and it makes you feel good to do that. Or perhaps you want, as many people do, many people don't actually want the baby to be taken from them. They want somebody to take care of all the rest of the stuff that needs doing. So light housework and running errands and whatever that might be. And then it's the emotional support, and the emotional support actually takes up a huge amount of the role. People want to talk, people want to debrief their births and actually be listened to with compassion and be validated. Often when people tell their birth stories, perhaps friends or family might interject with their own stories and their own opinions, and it's difficult to actually just say what you need to say and to process that experience. So that's a huge part of it as well. And then signposting, we will always signpost clients to other resources postnatally that they might need. That could be breastfeeding support for more complex issues. A lot of doulas can help with the initial kind of attachment and positioning side of things. It might be referring on for mental health support or physio. Anything that comes up, we will always signpost our clients on. So it's really bespoke to each person's individual needs, and it's generally a long-standing relationship and ultimately friendship. I always find it difficult to sort of move on. The clients will come to the end of their time with me and sort of say goodbye, and I find myself really thinking about them a lot and wanting to get in touch, and we do then continue to meet for coffees and things, because it's a special relationship.
Yeah, it really is a special relationship because, women supporting women, it's like biblical. We read about it in the Red Tent, and we know how powerful the community of women is. There's something magical about having this opportunity to go through something like this. And it can be really traumatic. If you've suffered from morning sickness from the beginning of your pregnancy, that is really traumatic. And then you felt really poorly for 7 or 8 months. To not have a place to talk about that and not have someone who can listen without judgment, because very often many of us like to tell our birth stories, but to have that safe space to release it. And when we can externalize, when we can talk. And then we've also got the thing of, if you want to have more kids, and our previous pregnancy and childbirth was traumatic, there's an element of needing to go through that process of talking about it to help reduce the anxiety of like, what happens if that happens again? What happens if my sickness is, if just as bad, if not worse? What happens if my birth is the same? Just going through what happens postnatally, physically with our body and all the changes, and physically with our relationships and all of that, to know that there's someone like you to offset, to offload I think is huge. And I think it is without meaning to be too sort of dramatic, I think it's life-changing and possibly life-saving as well. And it's just a shame that, doulas are a private service, and it's not. I know we have health visitors, and I remember having one health visitor who was incredible, and she had 5 children, and she went above and beyond when I had my 4th child. But then I'd had health visitors before who I genuinely thought were like watching me to see if I was doing anything wrong, and I was terrified that I was going to wind the baby wrong, or I was going to put the baby down in the cots, swaddled incorrectly. And that's, again, for someone, with neurodivergent, that RSD, that flares up, that fear of what happens, if they take my baby away, what happens if they think I'm not coping? I know I'm throwing lots of things into the mix here, but, lots of things are kind of flooding back to me as I remember as being undiagnosed and recognizing those challenges. We'll come to the positives in a minute, but I just wanted to say, when I talk about that, do you hear this, especially with the anxiety? Do you notice this with your neurodivergent clients? Is there anxiety something that is recognizable in that specific group?
Definitely. I think most people can identify with experiencing a level of anxiety antenatally and postnatally. I mean, it is by the very nature of this time in your life, there's a huge amount of change going on. There's an identity shift, and then there's the responsibility for raising another person. And with that brings anxiety. There's no doubt about it. But neurodivergent people are often, starting in a place of high anxiety as well. And that comes from trying to, cope and manage with living in a world that's very much set up for neurotypical needs and not neurodivergent needs. So anxiety is a huge thing. And I think the most important thing, or the first step in supporting somebody with anxiety perinatally, is that validation. It's validation of what you're going through, of your thoughts and your feelings. And, I always bang on about self-compassion as well. And I think that's something that's really important to share with people who are experiencing anxiety. With self-compassion is kind of that moment of mindfulness about your thoughts, and really applying humanity to it, and recognizing that actually what you're going through is really difficult, and many people in your shoes would also be finding this really challenging, and giving yourself some love and kindness in that moment. But for me, in terms of doula support in general for neurodivergent people, I think having a doula can be hugely impactful. And part of what I'm trying to do with neurodivergent birth is make it more accessible for neurodivergent people. So I have on my website, which is ndbirth.com, a list of doulas, a doula directory. These people are neurodivergent themselves, or they have been trained in supporting neurodivergent people. And I think that's really key. And I'm keen to kind of keep building on that. And ultimately, I'd like to be able to offer an access fund so that people who perhaps don't have the means to be able to access private doula support and are neurodivergent can apply for it, via ND Birth. And there are examples of that working elsewhere. For example, in Aberdeen, where I live in the northeast of Scotland, I work with a community interest company. We're called Aberdeen Birth Collective. We're a collective of 4 doulas, and we have funding through our local authority to offer free access support for women and birthing people who are vulnerable in some way. There's different kind of criteria. That might be previous trauma, it might be neurodivergence, limited means, previous history of abuse. There's a kind of long list, unfortunately, of ways that people might qualify for that support. But the impact of that, Kate, has been life-changing for some of the people that we've supported. There's no doubt about it. These are people who don't have any other support and are really struggling at a time which is already, very challenging. And we've been able to offer that support for free. So that's the goal ultimately, is to be able to improve access for neurodivergent people to that level of support.
That sounds incredible. Like exactly what I was thinking. It was just like, this needs to be so accessible for people, because as we know with, the NHS, the way things are here in the UK, it's really hard to see someone face to face. It's really hard to get that personal, that time. And I remember, my son's 18 now and my youngest is 8. And the difference between each midwife and pregnancy, and I used to see the same midwife every single week with my son. And as the years have gone, I wouldn't know who I would see. The weeks would get a bit longer. I would sort of see just different locum midwives, whoever was there. There was not that contact, that connection. I didn't feel like she knew who I was. She'd go through my notes and, it was just kind of reading someone else's notes. To know that you've got that sort of long-standing connection, but also support is invaluable. But also to know that as you go through the process and postnatally as well, to ask those questions of, I didn't know about reflux. I didn't know about tongue tie. I thought I was doing something wrong. I didn't know about certain ways of winding the baby, or certain ways of the sleep positioning, because I just thought it had to be only on the back and that's it. And all these different things that I have unfortunately just had to learn the hard way, that I would have loved to have known, had that support. And looking back, there's long, dark nights where you are pacing the house. And to know that there's an opportunity to send someone a text or a voice note, all these things now. It really, really does. And I think what you're doing is incredible. It makes me actually really, emotional thinking about it, because of how powerful that connection can be for women.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you for that, because I look back and I think, because it is, you're so close to it, when you've gone through that process, and you can look back, and just this conversation now just brings up all these, those nights, those days, those mornings. That it was weird, because only this week we've been talking about it, and my kids were asking me, what you do with the baby, every day, and all of that. And they didn't know why we were talking about it. And I said that none of you wanted to sleep in your cot during the day. And I was joking about it. I said, I used to just walk and walk and walk. But then on the flip side, that walking, even though I didn't get that time at home, which I could have done with to put a wash on and make dinner and everything, I walked probably for 2 hours every day pushing a buggy. And that for me was my mental health savior, because I was getting outside, I was exercising, I felt much better, like the dopamine was there. Again, this is way before my diagnosis, but I kind of think, if I didn't have the walking, I wonder where I would have been from a mental health perspective. I want to leave this conversation with hope. And also with positivity around our neurodivergence and the childbirth experience and the pregnancy experience. What are you noticing from that perspective of what can we bring to the table that is different and positive in this experience?
I totally agree. I think it's so important to also talk about the positives, because there are positives, and we can become too fixated on what's difficult, and we need to look at the whole picture. For me, everybody that I have spoken to and worked with who is neurodivergent has been so passionate about learning and becoming as informed as possible about birth, and I think that's so important. I think sort of going into labor and birth with an attitude of what will be is often problematic, and it leads to trauma in many instances, because we do need to know our choices. This is your birth. It's so important. It's about your body, your mind and body and soul, and that of your family and your baby, and to go into it to be able to make informed choices because you've done your research, I think is really key. And, that applies to the postnatal period as well. I mean, hyperfocus is an interesting thing, right? It can, in some ways, it can become all-consuming to a point of it being an issue if it contributes to levels of anxiety, or the rest of life just drops away. So you're not going to your appointments and you're not eating when you need to be eating and hydrating yourself because you're so focused on a topic. But it also means that many people who are hyper-focused on postnatal topics are just, doing absolutely everything they can for their kids, to learn everything they can to to feed potentially. And I think that's an amazing thing. So having that knowledge and that passion for pregnancy, birth, and parenthood is amazing. I think it's so interesting going back to the sensory side of things again, because we often talk about sensory avoidance and how the postnatal time can be so difficult from a sensory point of view and overwhelming. But lots of people have reported to me, lots of new parents have said what a sensory joy that time was. Like, you know, being in that bubble where it's just you and your newborn asleep on your chest and you're on the sofa watching Netflix or whatever you're doing. And I know that doesn't encompass the whole postnatal experience because there's a lot of other things going on. But people really get a lot of sensory seeking. People can really experience a huge amount of sensory joy, the pressure, the warmth of the baby, feeling their baby's heartbeat, listening to their breathing. I think if you're, if you have sensory sensitivities that differ from your neurotypical peers in that sense, that can, the sensory joy of that time can be amazing and something to be celebrated, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely remember those days where I just used to smell my baby's neck, because I just loved that smell of the...
I still sniff my kids. It's not always good, but
it's just, and that it is the cuddling and the just the love, the unconditional love. And, you know, I know that it's not always that case, but for me, I loved that bubble. I love that bubble of a newborn, and it made everything else worthwhile when we had that time where I personally loved breastfeeding, and I know that's also, something that is very, very different and very personal. But I do wonder now if that was, I really felt that connection. I felt like a deep, deep connection. When the milk comes in, and you kind of almost get that, like, I know there's a word for it and I don't know what it is. And it's like that 1 or 2 minutes when the milk comes in, and it's almost like a euphoria, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I've heard that with neurodivergent mothers, it's more intensified. I read about that.
I think this experience is often more intensified, and people have reported things like, many people might not want to feed in the middle of TK Maxx because that's really, there's a lot of people there. And
How do you know I love TK Maxx?
But somebody reported to me that actually feeding when they were out and about was the perfect thing for her to regulate. If she felt overwhelmed by people, by noises of being in a busy place, and then she fed her baby, it's like the world just kind of closed in. It felt like this bubble formed around them, and the oxytocin was flowing, and they really had this kind of intense and very regulating experience. So I think that side of it's really interesting as well.
Yeah. And I just, I remember, again, not knowing ADHD and seeing my friends who were bottle feeding. And I was thinking, how are they so organised? They've got to put all the bottles, sterilise with the water, and they've got to remember the powder. And so for me, from an executive functioning side, breastfeeding was much easier because I didn't have to plan and I didn't have to be organised, because I just could go out and always know that there was milk on tap. And so for me, looking back, I kind of think that's why I chose to breastfeed, because the bottles and organising all of that was tricky for me. Again, all these different little things where we find these loopholes and these hacks that work for us. And we have to find, as mothers, routines and structures that sometimes the books, don't talk about. Again, back in the day, there was Gina Ford. I mean, I literally used to read that book and just want to throw it out the window.
I'd like to say something stronger,
but there was a visceral reaction to her book to me. It was it was just like, how can this woman tell me to be so structured and so routine led? Like, and then I realized, the empowerment came in on baby number 2, that there's just no way I'm doing this. I'm being told and being punished and, made to feel guilty for not sticking to this routine. And then I do think this is maybe a neurodivergent thing, is that once we trust in our structures and our routine, it may not look like what other people do, but when we trust and we see the results, that we've got happy babies and thriving babies, and even though they're not on that same routine, it's okay to do things our way, and it's okay to lean into our intuition and trust that it's okay. It's okay to do things differently. And that in itself takes so much pressure off, doesn't it?
I think intuition is something that we've really lost touch with. And it's no wonder. I mean, we have access to so many opinions online, and our tendency is to want validation in what we're doing. So we'll go onto Facebook and ask the opinion of a stranger thousands of miles away about what to do for our baby and our family. We don't often take that opportunity to just really sit with it and think, okay, what's important here for me? And I think as well, what you're saying about what works for you, working for you is really key for neurodivergent families as well. Because I mean, as a mum of a neurodivergent little person, I know that when she was a baby, her sensory seeking behaviors were there from the beginning, right? So she was a baby that was, had intense kind of sensory needs, even at the very start. So the routines would never have worked. And we had to do a lot of kind of wild things to soothe her, and kind of strange dances for hours on end, and the baby carrier and the hair dryer was on, which I don't recommend. That's not safe. There was all kinds of, it was very difficult to soothe her at times. And I think that's important as well. Neurodivergent parents do often have neurodivergent babies, and their needs and the ways that they are soothed and the routines that they end up following may look very different to what you're reading in the books. And just knowing that and being aware of that and being flexible around that can really help people to not feel the shame and the anxiety around their individual situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think, do things your way. If your baby's happy and it's thriving and it's sleeping in that way, then, nothing lasts forever. And there's always going to be like another structure that we need to, abide by, because when they start weaning and all those different things. And I remember driving up and down the motorway. I remember putting white noise on my phone. I remember, like you say, dancing around the house at 3:00 in the morning and giving them the textures that they like and the dummies that they like. And if it wasn't that specific dummy, we'd have to run out to a midnight pharmacy to get that dummy. And I look back and absolutely, we're going to have kids who are probably neurodivergent as well. And to almost be accepting of that their needs are going to be maybe very intense for us. But at the same time, when we find those things that work, it can really be, very helpful for us as parents. I just want to thank you so much for this conversation. I feel like I've gone through some form of healing therapy.
I mean, I'm the same. I mean, that's what brought me to this work, was having had, really challenging experiences. And I think it's important that as a doula, that's not my main driving force, because this isn't about my healing through other people's experiences. My clients' needs are always going to be different, and their stories and what's right for them is always going to be the most important thing. But no, I see the value in this work, absolutely, and that's why I do it. And if anybody is listening that is kind of at this stage in their life, I would just recommend that they seek out the people who understand and listen to the podcast. And that's a good place to start, and feel validated in your experience, because that makes all the difference to how you start your life together as a family, when you've got that good foundation of kind of good emotional well-being at the beginning.
Yeah. So can you direct people to your podcast and your website and just how they can get in touch with you?
So on Instagram, I'm at Neurodivergent Birth, which is all one word, and then we're www.ndbirth.com. I work with another doula, Sam Shepherd. She is an autistic advocate as well, and we run a workshop for birth workers. So if there's any birth workers listening, midwives, doulas, hypnobirthing instructors who want to improve their understanding of support needs for neurodivergent people perinatally, then that's a good place to start. But yeah, for neurodivergent people, listen to the podcast, come and join the conversation on Instagram, and stay tuned for workshops in the new year, specifically for neurodivergent pregnant people.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I really hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you did and it resonated with you, I would absolutely love it if you could share on your platforms or maybe leave a review and a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please do check out my website, adhdwomenswellbeing.co.uk, for lots of free resources and paid for workshops. I'm uploading new things all the time and I would absolutely love to see you there. Take care and see you for the next episode.